Good morning, and thank you for joining me for Eye on New Mexico today. It's 2015, and that means we are in the future. Little Back to the Future reference there for some of you fans. Movies like that, stories about the future, have always made us wonder, what if we could travel to the future or predict the future? Well, my guest today says he can. He is a futurist, a thinker, a speaker, and he will be participating in an exciting event in Albuquerque this spring, the first Face the Future conference, the first annual, I should say. Thanks for being here, David Houle.
Yes.
And we want to start with a little bit of your past here, actually. You are a media veteran here. You spent many years in the media. You've moved around to different businesses. And before we get to what a futurist does, tell us where you came from.
Okay, well, you know, because that partly sets up the future. A long time ago, probably before you were born, I was worked for NBC, and then I worked for CBS, and then I made what everybody said was a stupid decision. I took a 50% pay cut to go join and become part of the team that created and launched MTV, Nickelodeon, VH1, and CNN Headline News. That was all in the early 80s, and of course, cable was only in 10%.
Before anyone knew,
right,
yeah.
You know, cable's not going to work. Video music, are you kidding? 24-hour news, that'll never work. And of course, it did. And then later on, I was in the production side, and I won a couple of Emmys for a kids show, and was nominated for a Peabody, which you know is the great thing in journalism, and got nominated for, but didn't win an Academy Award. And then in the late 90s, relative to media, I was running a company that was creating online courses. Oh, well, in the late 90s, that'll never work. There'll never be. So that my media has always been. I've always moved to the new media right before it really happened.
Yeah, interesting.
So, yeah.
And a futurist. Let's define that term for some people, because you call yourself that. It's not necessarily a job, but what is it? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I grew up reading the great futurists of the last century, Dr. Alvin Toffler, Buckminster Fuller, Marshall McLuhan. So to me, that was a very respected term. The early part of this century, I gave a talk, and it was like I lit up the room, and I said, what is this? This feels so good. And I defined what I was doing at that moment as being a catalyst to get people, markets, companies, and the world to think about the future, and then to facilitate the conversation about it. So to this day, like I'm giving a keynote speech tomorrow in Santa Fe, that's how I'm going to define myself. So I'm a catalyst to get people to think about the future, because people think they do, but they don't really.
You know, I've heard you say that before, actually, that people don't think enough about the future. Who doesn't think? We all think about the future to some extent here.
Well, you know, when I wrote my first books, I was writing it 2006, 2007, The Shift Age. I realized, duh, why don't I ask people what they think about the future? So I went out on one-on-one so people aren't nervous about what they say, and I go, so tell me what you think about the future. And the first bucket or categories, oh, well, you know, I want to get promoted, I want to get married, I want to move to the suburb, have kids. Oh, my plans. So future to them was all personal. The second category was the other one I expected, which was, oh, it's really bad, you know, we have a recession, we're going to leave the place worse than our parents, all negative. And then the third category, which is the one I didn't see, but I think it's the biggest category. So what do you think about the future? You know, I guess I don't think I'm caught up in my life and my plans and what I have to do. So I realized that I serve a purpose. If people think the future's personal, no, it's not. If they think that it's negative, I think we're in a positive time in the history of humanity. And if you don't think about it, you better think about it, otherwise it's going to happen unto you.
Yeah. Fascinating. And you were telling me that you sort of, you know, you obviously did a lot of reading of other futurists.
Right.
You also kind of just found yourself always interested in what was going to be happening as opposed to what's already happened.
Right.
Because I think a lot of people wonder, how are you able to make these predictions? And we'll talk about some of the things that you've predicted shortly here. But yeah, how is one able to do that?
Well, you know, people always say, well, how do you do your research? And they think it's a left brain rational thing, and it's not. I've developed all my life, as I was saying, I've always been fascinated. So when you spend a life trying to look ahead, you develop a certain capability to do that. Then I always say I'm the most superficial intellectual grazer you'd ever want to meet. I never read a whole book. I'll be reading 5 or 6 books at once. You know, I scan through lots of periodicals because my job is to see broadly. Most people that would be watching the show focus on their career, and they focus, so they're very vertical. And so I'm very horizontal. And so by looking widely, developing an intuitive sense, and focusing on things that I'm pretty clear about, like energy or education, things like that. I stay away from things that I don't know because I can't add value.
It has served you pretty well.
Yes.
You predicted sort of the changes that were coming in the media, as you mentioned, in the early 80s back then.
Right.
In the 90s, you moved to something that we saw a big change in education, online learning, things like that. So you've done work in that. You've predicted the spike in oil prices that we saw years back, and of course now the fall in oil prices. That's a huge story. So these are areas that are affecting all of us. Every single one of us is affected by these things that you've looked at.
Yeah, so people, when they say, oh, you're a futurist, so you must talk about the future of technology. I say, no, I don't talk about the future of technology. I talk about how the rapid innovation of technology is changing human behavior. Because that's what's important. We're humans. What's the future for humans? You know, a gadget's a gadget, but that gadget changes our behavior. That's what's interesting to me.
You are saying that we have moved beyond the information age. Some think we are still in the information age. There was the industrial age, followed by the information age. We are now in a new age that is defined by increased globalization, some different characteristics. Talk a little bit about what's happening to us now and kind of where we're going.
So again, I'm a student of futurists, and there was the agricultural age, the industrial age, and the information age. So along around 2005, when I was really contemplating doing this full time, I realized, well, the information age got its name in the early 70s. The Cold War was still on, there wasn't a global economy, there was no such thing as the internet, and there weren't any cell phones. Just those four things alone would change humanity, right? So I'm going, okay, so we've got to be entered a new age, and what might that age be called? And all the other ones around product, agricultural, industrial, and information. So I said, no, this is one that's going to be so transformative that all aspects of our lives, to some degree, are undergoing to go an amount of shift and a different rate of shift. So I started calling it the shift age, and people just said, what's that? And you know, the thing that I like to say is, when my first book, The Shift Age, went up on Amazon, it was the only nonfiction book that had the word shift in it. Go there now and there's like 30, so I called it right.
Yeah. And this is defined by not just that, we talk about the global economy a lot. Well, first of all, tell us about that. The global economy is changing the way we educate our students nowadays. I mean, we are always talking about how we need to adapt to that. Because that is the future, and what is happening?
Yeah, so we're getting ever more globalized. The three forces of the shift age are the flow to global, but it's not just the global economy. We've literally entered the global stage of human evolution. We've gone from family to tribe to village to city-state to nation-state. Now we're getting integrated globally. I would say that most of the viewers of this show, almost every aspect of their life has been altered by this global reorganization. At the same time, there's this flow to the individual where we as individuals are ever more powerful than we've been before. I mean, you're in the news business. You know, 20, 30 years ago, you had to work your way up to be able to do this. I write a blog from wherever I am, whatever hotel room I happen to be in, and people from 43 countries read it, and that's just me individually loading it up.
Yeah.
And both those forces, the flow to the global and the flow to the individual, are amplified, but what is clearly the most powerful force in the world today, the accelerated electronic connectedness of the planet. So those are the three forces, and I would say that almost anybody listening to this conversation, any change that's happening in their life could go back to globalization, individual power, or connectivity.
Yeah, I definitely agree there, and you know, we talk about social media a lot. That's a big part of it. What that really implies is just that connectedness, as you mentioned there. And how can a business use that? Let's go ahead and move into some of what you are, the reasons you're forecasting. Government leaders, business leaders seek you out. So knowing that, knowing what you know, how does that help a city like Albuquerque, for example, where we're going to have this conference, or a state like New Mexico?
You know, Albuquerque, again, I'm slightly ahead of the times. I live in the future. I always say I kind of live a deja vu life. Oil goes up and it's expensive. Well, I told you it was going to happen. And I view Albuquerque and New Mexico as a city and a state that are about ready to have a resurgence. So to all of you listening, I think that's going to happen. You go back in history, and of course I study history and science. You have Los Alamos, which is, you know, post-World War II. You have Sandia Labs. You have White Plains missiles, well, the drones. So there's this history of technological innovation. However, the state has relied on the government and the military for a lot of its resources, which is why it's taking longer to come out of recession. So I see what is happening with the economic development here, with Gary Opedal and Mayor Barry. They're really recreating a downtown, and they're re-energizing it. And New Mexico really has to kind of grow that entrepreneurial spirit, because there aren't any Fortune 500 companies here. So one of the reasons, and we can talk about the conference, I'm bringing it here, is to highlight what I think this state is about ready to become.
Yeah, we have these programs like Innovate ABQ here
right.
in Albuquerque right now, and you know, for the people watching that don't know a lot about that, it is that sort of being driven by these small entrepreneurs, right. Not big companies. Is that a model that's worked in other places where people can create ideas and,
sure.
and get those off the ground and actually build and stimulate the economy that way?
Absolutely, and it takes a while to do. You know, South by Southwest put Austin on the map, and there's something like 125 people under the age of 35 move into Austin every day. Yeah. And I'm a futurist in residence at a college in Florida, so I'm in touch with a lot of millennials, and they're either going to Austin, Denver, Seattle, or Portland, because those are the cities that have an image of youthful innovation and entrepreneurship. And of course, Silicon Valley, but you know, that's almost a bubble by now. And so I think that Innovate ABQ and the commitment here of the business community is beginning to rally around in a way that could reach a critical mass. I mean, it takes years for that perception to emanate out, but I think it's happening here.
Yeah, it always is disheartening to read stories about the states around us growing: Colorado, Texas, Florida. They said the Sun Belt states are seeing the migration to those states, and here we are in a beautiful place with beautiful weather, and people are leaving our state. Right. So it's great to hear this positive outlook from you. Does Albuquerque have anything besides Innovate ABQ? Anything in the works right now? Anything in New Mexico that that to you looks like something that could really, that we should really be putting our eggs in this basket for our future here?
I wouldn't say that's any one thing. For something to work, there has to be a lot of things that bubble up simultaneously. You know, if a big company were to move their headquarters here, yeah, sure, that would work short term, but that wouldn't create the critical mass of buzz and integration. Once a very talented young person out of college with any kind of a degree says, if I can go to Albuquerque and do my start, if it doesn't work, there's another critical mass there, I can go work for somebody else to do that. That has to happen a little bit more. And there's companies here that I've heard about called Fat Pipe, and the company that Google bought that's the drone company. So all of that is starting to happen. And I can't point to any one thing. I can point to the leadership of Mayor Barry and Gary Opedal, head of economic development, because they're the ones that really empowered us to bring the conference here. Taking
advantage of your expertise on that and the things people are doing. All right, we're going to take a quick break, but we'll talk more when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. Fascinating conversation today. I'm talking with David Houle, a futurist, thinker, and speaker. And he'll be attending and hosting a conference here in Albuquerque in May 5th and 6th, actually. We'll get you more details throughout the next few months as this becomes closer. But everyone's going to be able to go to this, and this is mostly focused on the business community, government leaders that want to take advantage of a futurist point of view on where we're going, how we can improve the economy here in New Mexico. We were talking a little bit before the break, David, about oil prices, and you had predicted their spike back in the day a few years back. Now they've fallen, and you're saying we're going to enter this new age of generally lower energy costs. Of course, here in New Mexico, we've been talking about the negative impact that's had on our state's finances. What's happening? Yeah.
Well, so yeah, I've somehow been accurate with oil, and I've been, you know, I called $125 a barrel, went to 148 in 2008, and since then I've said oil would trade within the range of $90 to $120 a barrel, and I've been right. The beginning of 2014, a year ago, I said I think there could be some downward pressure. It could get down to around 70, which people said, oh, that'll never happen, and I was even wrong, because now I think it opened today at 48. So there is that oil issue. The reason that oil is going down, there's several reasons. One, the fracking business has grown tremendously in the United States. We're almost producing as much as Saudi Arabia. Second thing is Saudi Arabia, for the first time, is going for market share. They're not stopping production. So, and China is slowing economically, Europe is slowing economically. So you have supply outstripping demand. The other thing you have is 15 years ago, if you and I were to buy a car, you couldn't get a car that would get 35 miles to the gallon. So the technology in all the cars means there's using less gas. So that's why it's going down. I think it's going to bounce up, but I'm one of the people that I think that oil is going to remain at a lower price for a longer time than most people. And so I think oil is going to stay certainly under $90 a barrel in the foreseeable future. But complementary with that, during the Great Recession and then over the last couple of years, the price of alternative and renewable energy, solar, wind, has now fallen, so it's the same price to create into energy as fossil fuels. So now all of a sudden you have alternative sources of energy that those of us that are aware of the environment and global warming realize, well, that's a superior energy. So now it's at the same price. 10 years ago, it was twice the price or 3 times the price. So you have increased technology, lower demand, increased production, and cheaper alternative forms of energy. All of that, I think, you know, just over the last few years, as you've reported the news, it's always been energy, always going up, always going up.
Yeah.
I think, so it's the early part of 2015. I don't want to venture how long, but I think we might be entering a 2 to 5 year period globally of lower energy costs.
Well, and it's really interesting here in New Mexico because we do get so much of our money from oil and gas revenues here. Yeah, and in a state where we have at times had solar companies here and wind companies that didn't do as well here and didn't get off the ground, and people talk about the prices not being compatible with how low oil prices were. Now you're saying they're on par with each other, and we're still not seeing that development, at least not here.
Yes. New Mexico is going to take an economic hit because of the low price of oil and gas, but the prediction from others, from economists, is that if oil stays anywhere near where it's been over the last month, the American public will have $75 billion of extra money to spend. That is a rising tide. That is huge in a consumer-generated economy. The reason I think that solar, and I don't know the details of this state, have failed is that the early ones weren't well capitalized, or they had a wrong business model. But when you talk about a state that's got more days of sunshine than any other state, you know, as I go up, you know, I'm giving this speech tomorrow in Santa Fe, as I drive back and forth between Santa Fe and Albuquerque, it's like, why aren't there wind farms everywhere like there are in the Midwest? You know, and solar, I know there's a solar one on the way up, but now that cost, so the people that say it's too expensive are people that have a vested interest in saying that. And there's a great quote from one of the muckrakers 100 years ago, something like, it's very hard to persuade somebody to believe in something when their paycheck forces them to not want to believe it, right? So there's a little bit of that going on, I think.
In general, are lower energy costs worldwide, this new age of lower energy costs, is that a good thing?
I think it's a very good thing. From the consumer point of view, I was writing last night with my co-founder of this conference, and I said, $1.79, right? I haven't seen $1, and I travel all around the country. $1.79. Of course, I'm old enough to remember when that was a high price, but nevertheless, and you saw the surge in sales around Christmas. It's a direct correlation to that. When you fill up a gas tank and you have an SUV and it's $100 and all of a sudden it's $50, that just hits you in the face.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's
so I think it's a good thing, and also it lowers the cost of transport around the world. It sooner or later the airlines are going to have to start lowering their prices because they're clearly making a lot of money in the spread. So if you're a consumer, it's a very good thing.
Interesting. What else is happening? What are the big things kind of on the horizon here?
Well, that is a long, and I think, and perhaps for many people who watch this show, it may not be immediately relevant, but we've entered the second stage of the global economy. The first global economy, 25 years, began, say, 1989. China came in, you know, and India came in, and Vietnam came in, and Thailand. So now everybody's in, and everybody's a player. So the second stage, which I think is going to be looked back on by historians in 5 to 6 years as having occurred last year into this year, is a much more integrative interactive, inevitably connected. The low price of oil is putting Russia at risk.
Yeah.
The connectivity means that communication is free and global. An interesting thing that I find, that I've said it so many times, but it provokes a response. So we're about 3 feet apart. If I had your cell phone number and I were to call you on my cell phone, 1-1000, 2-1000, 3-1000, 5 seconds, your phone would ring. If I were to call somebody in China, say 12,000 miles away, maybe another 2 seconds because of the relay of the satellite. So the difference between 3 feet and 12,000 miles today is 2 seconds.
Wow.
And then when you get on the phone, probably you say as I say, one of the questions is, so where are you? Where are you at? So there's no time, distance, or place limiting human communication. That could not be said as recently as 5 years ago. No. So that's a whole new paradigm that the consequences of which are profound.
Yeah. We in this state talk a lot about our education system and getting on par with the other states, the world, the global economy. Of course, as a nation, we talk about how we're not where we need to be. And what do we need to be teaching the kids today, the ones who will be working in this future that you're predicting?
Well, I've spoken a lot about the generations, the millennials, those born in the 80s and the 90s, and the digital natives, those born since 1997. They're completely different than baby boomers are or Gen Xers. I wrote a book called Shift Ed, a Call to Action for Transforming K-12 Education, and it came out in 2011 because I saw that this decade education's being transformed. So to answer your question, education is going to get accelerated. I've spoken all around the country to school superintendents. I say, ask the right questions. What's the right school year? The school year is based on the agricultural age. Spring break, you went and helped with the farm. We're teaching buildings that were built in the industrial age. And I have even led what has now become a movement in this country. Baby boomer teachers were nervous about what the kids would be doing with their smartphones, so they'd make them turn them off. And I have been saying, that's just because you don't understand it. If all of the world's knowledge is 2 or 3 keystrokes away and a child has it, don't you want them to go out? So now I've helped teachers, and I think there's a whole movement to have teachers use smartphones to accelerate learning. In addition, there's going to be a whole lot of software for self-directed learning. I have people who come up to me and say things like, my 4-year-old on my iPad can do multiplications up to 12. He can learn and speak Spanish because we have Spanish child care. And that is 3 years before the school system says he's old enough to read. Right? So you're going to have kids coming into preschool. Your 2 young kids are going to go into preschool with 2 or 3 years of digital experience. So it's all going to be transformed.
I'm not going to feel bad about the screen time anymore then.
No, that's right. The joke I have, I keynoted a digital publishing conference, and I said the way you have to, we all have these phrases like the bottom line is, we all need to be on the same page. I said to the audience, just change one word, we all need to be on the same screen. And it was like, it shifted. Because I read probably much more on screens than I read otherwise. It's probably you do. I mean, all the time.
Absolutely. And it's hard to understand exactly why we're still so behind then.
Right.
As you mentioned, just the school year itself. And I don't know what needs to change.
Well, as I say, I've traveled around the country. There's states, North Carolina, Indiana, that are now going to, I forget the phrase, is the universal school year. So 8 weeks of school, 3 weeks off.
A break.
Because it's all been shown, if you have 3 months off in the summer, retention falls. And so year-round school. And question grades. Why do you need, I mean, grade levels, first, second, and third grade. I mean, if you have 4-year-olds who can shoot, edit, and upload a video to YouTube, or you have self-directed learning, there's going to be a whole disparity. And this kind of arbitrary, all of the thinking of the schools that's in place in this state and most states came about between the end of World War II and the mid-'70s. Wow.
I hope education leaders also attend this conference coming up.
They
because
will.
We have this May 5th and 6th coming up.
May 4th, 5th, and 6th.
May 4th, 5th, and 6th.
Right.
It's the Future, Face the Future conference here in Albuquerque, the first annual conference, first ever. Tell us a little bit about what people can expect from this.
Well, as I travel the world, I speak about the future. I was saying to you before we started the interview. And then they talk about the future of oil and gas and the future of education. And I realized there is no conference in the world, there's no premier conference in the world about the future of everything. And at this critical juncture, this transformative time for humanity, we really need to face the future. So the Face the Future conference is going to be here May 4th, 5th, and 6th, 2015. And the city said, if you make a 5-year commitment, we'll support you. So we have bookings in the convention center through 2019.
Wow.
And the idea is to bring in great futurists, future thinkers, and have them integrate with Albuquerque. And as I've reached, I'm responsible for curating the conference. As I've reached out to all these speakers, they say to me, great idea, love the name, why Albuquerque, you know? And this is when there was some bad news going on. I'd say, you gotta come here and find out. Because this is going to be the next big state. So I have some credibility on that. And I want to thank KOB for becoming the station that is the official station of the conference, and we'll give you full access, and you'll be interviewing people like me and anybody else you want.
It's so exciting. Yeah, this is going to education, energy, healthcare, the media, privacy, and space travel. All of that is going to come up at this conference. We're running out of time here, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so real last thing. There'll be these high things that blow your mind: the future of robotics and space travel, and all this wonderful stuff, man and machine. And then there's going to be much more actionable stuff. How do you invest in the 21st century? How do you, as a leader, adapt and lead in the new workplace? How is all this gender disruption going to change the workplace? How are the generations? So big picture stuff and much more immediate, actionable stuff over the next few years.
Fascinating. This is going to really help our city, our state. David Houle, thanks for being here. Thanks for bringing this conference to us here. And we'll be talking a lot more about this.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed this.
All right.
My pleasure.
Good to meet you. And we'll be seeing you next weekend for another Eye on New Mexico.